She was 9 years old. She stood alone on one of the most watched stages in the world. No elaborate costume, no backup dancers, no safety net of any kind. Just a small girl from Hong Kong, a microphone, and a voice that made an entire arena go completely silent. When Celine Tam sang the opening notes of My Heart Will Go On, something happened that nobody in that auditorium fully expected. Judges froze. Audience members pressed their hands over their mouths. And within hours, tens of millions of people around the world were watching the same clip and asking the same question. Who is this child? But behind the golden buzzer, behind the standing ovations, behind the smile that seemed almost too large for one small face, there was a story that the cameras didn't always capture. A story of extraordinary pressure, painful controversy, and questions that followed this family long after the lights went down. This is the heartbreaking and inspiring story of Celine Tam. If stories like this move you, consider subscribing. We cover the full picture behind the performances you remember. AGT was the summer of 2017. America's Got Talent Season 12 was already well underway when a 9-year-old girl from Hong Kong walked out onto the stage at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. She wore a simple dress. She looked small beneath the lights. She introduced herself quietly, told the judges her name was Celine Tam, and said that she wanted to sing a song by her hero, Celine Dion. Simon Cowell leaned forward. What followed was 4 minutes that would be replayed millions of times across the world. Celine's voice, high, clear, and eerily controlled, filled that theater from the very first note. By the chorus, the audience was already on its feet. By the final line, Judge Melby had reached for the golden buzzer, sending a cascade of gold confetti down onto a 9-year-old girl who barely seemed to understand what had just happened to her life. The clip went viral within 24 hours. News outlets from the United States to the United Kingdom to the Philippines picked up the story. Here was a child who didn't just sing a difficult song. She sang it with the kind of emotional steadiness that most trained adult performers struggle to achieve. But even as that applause echoed around the world, something else was quietly beginning. Questions, whispers, and for Celine's father, a man named Steve Tam, a storm was forming on the horizon. Hold on to that detail, because it matters more than most people ever realized. T.O. understands Celine Tam. You have to go back to Hong Kong, back to a family where music wasn't just a hobby. It was a way of life. Celine Tam Hoyland was born in 2008. From very early in her childhood, the people closest to her noticed something that was difficult to explain. She didn't just enjoy music. She absorbed it. She could hear a melody once and reproduce it with a clarity that made adults stop mid-conversation and pay attention. Her father, Steve Tam, recognized what he was seeing almost immediately. He was a music teacher, later described publicly as a vocal coach and music education professional, and he began working with Celine while she was still very young. By the age of 5, she was already competing in music competitions in China. By 6, she had built a quiet but real collection of awards and recognitions within that circuit. The family's world revolved around Celine's voice. Practice, performances, competitions, schedules that most adults would have found exhausting were simply the rhythm of life for a girl who had always known things this way. In 2014, when Celine was around 6 years old, she appeared on Little Big Shots, a children's talent showcase that gave her one of her first major experiences performing for a large audience outside of competitions. The response was warm, the audience was charmed, and the circle of people who knew her name quietly grew wider. But Hong Kong, for all its appreciation of her gift, felt like a limited stage for what Steve Tam believed his daughter could become. His ambitions for Celine were not local. They were not even regional. They were global, and he was determined to take her there. By 2017, Steve Tam had made a decision. His 9-year-old daughter was going to audition for America's Got Talent, one of the highest-rated, most-watched talent competitions anywhere in the world. It was a bold choice by any measure. Most children who appear on AGT are American, or at least based in North America. Celine was a 9-year-old from Hong Kong, performing in a second language, singing a song that had been made famous by one of the most iconic vocalists of a generation. The pressure alone would have silenced most adults before they ever reached the stage. Celine didn't seem to feel it. Or if she did, She kept it hidden in the same quiet place. She kept so many things, somewhere beneath the surface of that enormous, steady voice. Her golden buzzer moment became one of the most discussed AGT auditions in the show's recent history, and what followed was a run to the competition that kept audiences genuinely engaged. She performed multiple times. She drew emotional reactions from both the studio audience and viewers watching from home. She was compared not just to Celine Dion, whose name she happened to share, but to the very idea of what raw, real talent looks like when it hasn't yet been processed by the music industry. She was eliminated in the semifinals. For any child performer, that would be a defining disappointment. For Celine Tam, it turned out to be only the beginning. After AGT, Celine Tam's life changed in ways that were visible and ways that were not. The visible part was obvious, the attention. Overnight, she had become one of the most recognized child performers in the world. Social media pages dedicated to her grew rapidly. Invitations to perform arrived from multiple countries. Her original audition video climbed past tens of millions of views and kept climbing. Media requests piled up. Brands reached out. The comparisons to Celine Dion had taken on a life of their own. The real Celine Dion, through her team, acknowledged the young singer publicly, a moment that was shared widely and added another layer to the story. A 9-year-old girl from Hong Kong had somehow reached the direct attention of the woman she had chosen to admire and imitate. For Steve Tam, this moment confirmed everything he had believed about his daughter's potential. He began managing her public profile with increasing intensity, booking performances, overseeing media appearances, and actively positioning her for a career that could extend far beyond a single television competition. But as Celine's profile continued to rise, so did the scrutiny on the man guiding it. Chapter 5: The Shadow Behind the Spotlight. The first wave of public criticism towards Steve Tam appeared online, in comment sections on forums, and eventually in more formal media coverage. The accusations were pointed. Some accused him of exploiting his daughter's talent for financial gain, of turning her childhood into a product without her full understanding of what that meant. Others raised questions about his professional credentials, with rivals in Hong Kong's music education community making public claims that challenged his background and qualifications. There were also disputes involving other music instructors, conflicts that were murky in their specifics but consistent in their direction. Steve Tam, some argued, was a man whose behavior behind the scenes was very different from the supportive, devoted father figure presented on stage beside his daughter. Steve Tam denied many of these characterizations. He spoke publicly on several occasions, defending both Celine and himself. He framed the criticism as professional jealousy, as the inevitable result of being the father of a child that other people wanted to claim credit for creating. But the questions didn't go away. They settled into the background of Celine's story like a quiet, persistent noise, always there, even when nobody was saying it directly. For the millions of viewers who had genuinely fallen in love with Celine Tam, who had watched her sing and felt something real, the controversy around her father introduced a layered discomfort that didn't have an easy resolution. Could you admire the child while holding serious doubts about the parent? Could the talent be fully separated from the environment that shaped it? These were not comfortable questions. And for many in Celine's audience, they had no clean answer. Before we get to what happened next, and there are details here most people never heard, tell us in the comments. Did you watch Celine Tam on AGT when it originally aired? What did you think of her at the time? Despite everything swirling around her family, Celine Tam kept performing. In 2019, 2 years after her AGT appearance, she appeared on World's Got Talent, an international version of the franchise with a broader global reach. She was 11 years old. She earned another golden buzzer. That second golden buzzer was significant. It confirmed what her original AGT run had suggested. This was not a one-season story, not a one-moment wonder. This was a career that was still developing, still moving, still building toward something. She also made choices during this period that revealed a dimension to her public identity beyond pure performance ambition. She became an ambassador for Room to Read, a nonprofit organization focused on children's literacy and education in developing countries across Asia and Africa. It was a meaningful choice for a young girl still in the process of forming her own sense of self, and it added depth to her public image that went well beyond talent show clips. She performed on prestigious stages across multiple countries. She gave interviews in both Cantonese and English. She spoke with growing confidence as she moved through her teenage years about wanting to write her own music, not just to perform other people's songs with extraordinary skill, but to eventually create her own. For supporters, these were signs of a young artist who was not simply talented, but thoughtful, who understood that a golden buzzer had opened a door and who was actively trying to walk through on her own terms. For critics, the questions about her father's role never fully quieted. Every new performance Celine gave was still shadowed by a conversation about who was driving it and at what cost. There's a particular kind of pressure that follows child performers who experience massive public success at a very young age. It is categorically different from the pressure adults experience. Adults can make their own decisions about whether to continue, when to stop, how to protect themselves. They can say no. Children cannot. Not fully. Not in any real way. Celine Tam's story lives in that complicated space. By every visible account, she was a child who genuinely loved to sing. The joy on her face during performances looked real, not hollow, not manufactured, not coached into existence. But the structure around that joy, the scheduling, the bookings, the public narrative, the family dynamics, was controlled by adults, by one adult, primarily. That reality changed how many people experienced her story over time. It didn't erase the talent. Nothing could touch what that voice was capable of, but it made the story more complicated than the simple fairy tale of a girl who sang and the world listened. It made it human. And human stories, with their messiness, their moral ambiguity, and their questions that never fully resolve, are the ones that tend to last. By the time casual viewers had moved on from America's Got Talent Season 12 and found new favorites, Celine Tam was still very much in motion. She was not a flash in the pan. She did not become one of those child performers who surfaces briefly, earns a clip that circulates for a year, and then quietly disappears into machinery of forgotten viral moments. She kept working. She kept performing. She kept growing, literally, as any child does, but also in skill and presence, and in the slow process of building an identity that belonged entirely to her. The version of Celine Tam who stood on the AGT stage in 2017 was 9 years old and singing someone else's defining song. The Celine Tam who emerged in the years following was older, more technically developed, and increasingly focused on finding a voice that was her own, not borrowed, not inherited from a legend, but genuinely hers. Those who followed her beyond the AGT clip watched that evolution with something close to quiet admiration. Here was a child who had been placed in an enormous spotlight at the most impressionable age, surrounded by controversy, weighed down by impossible comparisons to an icon, managed by a father whose judgment many questioned publicly. And she was still standing. Not just standing, still singing. Not everything about Celine Tam's story came to a clean resolution. The questions surrounding Steve Tam were never formally settled in any public record that addressed them fully. Some accusations were disputed. Some were absorbed into the ongoing noise of internet commentary and eventually forgotten, at least by anyone outside Celine's immediate world. What can be said with confidence is this. The controversy around her father introduced a shadow that followed Celine's story in ways that were, by any fair measure, deeply unfair to her specifically. A child cannot choose her parents. She cannot design the environment into which she is born. She cannot control which adult decides to manage her gift or how that adult makes their decisions. Celine Tam did not create the controversy around Steve Tam. She inherited it. She carried it publicly, visibly, in front of an audience of millions, without ever appearing to fully understand the weight of it or the shape it was giving to her story. That distinction matters. It matters enormously. The golden buzzer that Melby pressed in 2017 did not hand Celine Tam a smooth road. It opened a door, large, bright, and very public, and then the world stepped back and watched to see what a 9-year-old from Hong Kong would do with it. What she did was keep going. She kept going through the controversy around her father, through the semi-final elimination that disappointed millions of viewers who had wanted to see her go further, through the scrutiny that follows any child who achieves early fame and must figure out how to grow up while the world is still watching. She earned a second golden buzzer on a global stage. She became an advocate for children's education through Room to Read. She began expressing, with increasing clarity and conviction, a desire to write her own music someday, to create, not just a form, to be the author of her own emotional story, not just a vessel for someone else's. Those are not small things. Coming from a child who first entered global fame at the age of 9, they are signs of someone who is navigating an extraordinary set of circumstances and still managing to point herself in a forward direction. Celine Tam's story functions like a mirror in many ways. What you see in it depends largely on what you bring to it. If you bring admiration for extraordinary raw talent, you see a prodigy. If you bring concern about the structures that shape child performers, you see a child navigating a complicated situation that was never fully of her choosing. If you bring your own beliefs about family, ambition, and what parents are the children they raise, you see something harder and more personal to name. What is beyond dispute is this: talent like Celine Tam's does not arrive with instructions. It doesn't come with a guide for how to protect it or how to ensure that the person that lives inside gets to develop into a full, whole human being alongside it. The best we can do, as an audience, as people who clicked and share informed opinions, is hold her story with care, to remember that behind the voice was a child, that behind the golden buzzer was a life still being formed, and that behind the performances were choices, some made freely and many made for her by people with their own agendas. Her story is not finished. She is still young. Whatever she builds next will rest on everything that came before. The extraordinary gift, the complicated beginning, and the simple, stubborn fact of a girl who never stopped singing, from a small stage in Hong Kong to one of the most watched talent competitions in the world. From a child performing a legend's masterpiece to a young artist beginning to search for her own sound. Celine Tam's journey has been anything but ordinary, and by every indication, it is far from over. The golden buzzer was never the destination. It was only where the real story began. Here's a question that Celine Tam's story genuinely leaves us with. When a child as gifted grows up inside there's much pressure and public attention, does the audience that admire them carry any responsibility for what that costs them? Or does talent like this simply find its own way forward, no matter what surrounds it? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this one.